The story of Elijah is both interesting and moving. It shows how faith and drive can help you through unbelievably hard times. His journey makes us think about how much trust people can have and how much God can help them. Have you ever thought about how far your faith can be put to the test? Elijah had to deal with problems that were not natural. He had to disobey a king and even natural events like weather by God's word. How do we deal with the problems we face every day? Elijah's answer was clear, and his faith did not waver. What if they told you that the impossible could become real right in front of your eyes? Imagine being supported by people during a terrible drought instead of Elijah. This miracle, which is both strange and amazing, shows that even the most basic parts of nature can become sources of miracles when faith is present. While still on his mission, Elijah not only miraculously made it through life, but he also helped other people, like the widow of Zarephath, experience miracles. In making sure the widow had enough flour and oil, Elijah showed that God's supply can show up in strange ways, giving hope even in the worst situations. He did have times of deep despair and fear along the way, though, which shows that even the most devoted people have times when they question their faith. Still, Elijah's strength in the face of trouble and his willingness to do things based on faith teach us a lot about how hope and the human spirit can last. This story is more than just a list of wonders that have happened in the past. It asks us to think about how we can face problems with faith and courage. Elijah's life shows that when we have faith, trouble is not the end, but a way for the amazing to happen in our lives. When you're going through a tough time, think about Elijah and ask yourself how you can handle it with hope. If you are amazed by Elijah's bravery and how he dealt with impossible problems, please like this video and subscribe to the channel before we go on with the story. This helps us bring you more stories like this one that will make you feel good. Let's find out together how Elijah kept up his divine task. The story of Elijah keeps going with a mix of stress and miracles. Each moment is a strong reminder of God's presence and power in the middle of trouble and challenge. After the widow and her son were miraculously fed, Elijah meets an even tougher test. The son of the widow who took him in is sick and seems to be dead. In her pain, the widow has a deep crisis of faith, in which she questions the man of God's presence and plans. In answer, Elijah doesn't think twice. By bringing the son to the shore and crying out to God, he showed a deeper side of his relationship with the divine, one that is close enough to allow him to ask direct questions and make passionate prayers. The son's return is not only a spiritual answer to Elijah's prayers, but it also brings back the widow's faith. Witnessing such a personal miracle, this powerful scene is a turning point for the woman. She believes that the Lord's word through Elijah is true, which strengthens her faith in God's power and kindness. Elijah's fight with the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel was the climax of the story. This event isn't just a battle of faith, it's a heavenly show meant to bring the Israelites back to their faith in the one true God. When Elijah challenged them, the people were quiet, which shows that they were unsure of what to do and spiritually confused. It was like the widow's crisis of faith, but on a national level. Elijah shows unshakable faith and courage when he is by himself in front of hundreds of people. Not only is the test of the two altars a sign of faith, it is also a direct challenge to the gods that many Israelites worship, which are not Christian. When Elijah offered an offering, the Lord responded by sending fire from heaven to consume the altar that was wet with blood. This shows how great the God of Israel is and is a strong call to return to true prayer. This part of Elijah's story, which is full of problems and divine help, is not just a record of what happened in the past. It's also a call to think about what faith means, how faith is put to the test when things look the worst, and how miracles can make people believe again and become more spiritually committed. Jesus' amazing victory over the prophets of Baal and the son of the widow's son's resurrection show how strong God can be when we least expect it. They also tell us that hope and faith can win even in the worst situations. In the Bible, the continuation of Elijah's story on Mount Carmel is one of the most exciting and important parts. In this scene, divine power not only settles a religious disagreement, but also changes the way people relate to their faith. Setting the mood for stress and expectation is when the prophets of Baal get the sacrifices ready and then their god's deafening silence. Because he is cool and determined, Elijah turns this into a strong lesson about having faith in the real God. By making fun of the preachers of Baal's useless efforts, Elijah not only questions how dedicated they really were, but he also sets the stage for an undeniable display of the Lord's power. Elijah rebuilding the Lord's altar is both symbolic and a useful thing to do. Elijah rebuilds an altar with 12 stones, each one representing a different Israelite group. He also tries to bring the scattered tribes back together with their spiritual history and sense of who they are as God's chosen people. The fact that the trench is full of water emphasizes how impossible the task is, putting out a fire that hasn't even been lit yet, and makes the wonder that is about to happen even more powerful. Elijah finally prays to the Lord, and his words are both a request for help from God and a call for the Israelites to have new faith. A huge sign of how powerful and present the God of Israel is the fire that comes down from heaven and burns up the offering, the wood, the stones, and even the water. When the people responded right away by calling the Lord the only true God, it was a spiritual and emotional turning point. This event not only proves that Elijah is a prophet, but it also gives the Israelites a mental boost. They know that their God is the most important thing in the world, and they also know that they need to get rid of the practices and gods that had crept into their society. This event is very important because it shows God's power and brings Israel back together spiritually and in their identity. In this story, Elijah is shown to be more than just a prophet. He is also a spiritual fighter whose deeds on Mount Carmel are remembered for generations to come. The last thing we can learn from the fight on Mount Carmel is that when we are in our own battles, whether they are over faith, identity, or purpose, the call to see and follow the truth may take bravery and action, just like Elijah showed. This part of Elijah's trip is a strong warning that our true faith is often tested and shown when things are hardest. Elijah's journey, which was full of both divine victories and personal struggles, continues to teach us about people and God's power. Elijah faced the prophets of Baal with unwavering courage and strong faith. Now he faces a new task that tests his endurance and his own sense of victory and safety. He was brave on Mount Carmel, where he fought 850 enemies by himself. This reminds me of what Bible heroes like David did. Like David, who only had a gun and a stone to fight Goliath, Elijah didn't depend on weapons or numbers. Instead, he trusted that God would win. This view not only gave him courage, but it also shaped the way he led, with faith that turns fear into witness. After the amazing win on Mount Carmel, where the divine fire proved that God was the best, Elijah was asked to pray again for his people, this time to end the terrible drought that was hurting the land. As a result of his fervent prayer, a small cloud formed. This was the start of the rain that would change the scenery and bring life back to the area. This miracle, which happened so soon after the fight with the prophets of Baal, supports the idea that God's care is instant and personal, meeting the wants of his people. Soon after Elijah's win, Jezebel makes a death threat, which forces him to run away to protect his life. This difference between God's victory and people's fear shows a key truth about God's servants. they can still fight and feel hopeless. Elijah talks about how down he is under a tree. It's a vulnerable moment that speaks to everyone who has ever felt the weight of a mission or demands. By humbling himself and sending a helper to watch the sea, Elijah shows that he is still humble and dependent on God as he takes shelter on top of Carmel. Even when he felt like giving up, he kept his faith. It shows when, on the servant's seventh try, a small cloud appears and says, "The drought is about to end." The rain that follows isn't just a natural reaction, it's also a sign of new life and hope that proves God always answers at the right time. By running ahead of Ahab's chariot to Jezreel, Elijah shows how God can give his servants incredible power. This last action in the chapter not only shows that God is protecting Elijah, but it also serves as a physical memory of God's constant presence, which gives his people strength and support no matter what. In this way, the story of Elijah shows us how great faith can work when faced with fear and tiredness. Even the most powerful preachers have times of doubt and fear, but the fact that they keep going with their task shows how powerful God is at saving and keeping people. Elijah's journey is still a guide for people who want to learn more about how faith works in real life. Elijah's trip to the desert of Beersheba is marked by deep despair. This is a time that many people might consider a low point, but it turns out to be a key moment for spiritual and physical renewal. After a lot of hard times and victories, the prophet feels the weight of his purpose and turns to his humanity for comfort. He says he wants to give up, which is a feeling that all humans share. As Elijah sits under the juniper tree, he feels physically and emotionally worn out. The angel from heaven who gives him food and tells him to rest is a warning that even the greatest people need to be cared for and refreshed. This amazing food not only keeps Elijah alive and lets him move for 40 days and nights, but it also represents how God meets the deepest wants of his servants. It's meaningful and important that they reached Mount Horeb, which is known as the Mountain of God. Elijah meets God again here, in a place where people have met gods before. This time, it's not through a strong wind, an earthquake or fire, but through a soft word. This quiet but very personal moment of contact supports the idea that God often speaks in a small voice, especially when people are alone and having doubts. God asked Elijah a question, and his answer shows that he was constantly torn between intense loyalty and anger over his people's disobedience. Not only does this conversation help Elijah understand his current task, but it also gives him divine advice on what to do next, how to anoint kings, and how to choose Elisha to be his replacement. God's careful planning and his continued hope for Israel are shown by this handing over of duty and the promise that some will stay true. One of the most exciting and beautiful parts of the Bible is when Elijah's spirit goes up to heaven in a storm. Not only does this event end Elijah's job on earth, it also shows that he is one of God's great messengers and gives him great respect. Elijah and Elisha were separated by a chariot and horses of fire. This was a sign of a change in God's power and the continuation of Elisha's spiritual work. When you look at Elijah's story, from God's victory to hopelessness to human rebirth, you can learn a lot about faith, God's care, and our own spiritual battles. We are called, like Elijah, to know our own limits and to look to God, not just in times of trouble, but all the time as a source of power and direction. This story makes us think about our own spiritual journeys and helps us see how God guides and supports us in our own hills and deserts. We see that Elijah's story is more than just a story about things that happened in the past when we think about it. It shows the path people take as they look for faith, meaning, and most of all, spiritual knowledge. Elijah, a prophet in a troubled time, had to deal with both enemies on earth and storms of doubt and fear inside his own mind. This shows that even the greatest people in the world face problems. Although Elijah faced a lot of hardship, he was determined to follow God's call. This is a strong lesson that being a true leader often means making huge sacrifices and having the courage to face hard truths. By telling Israel they were going to be judged, Elijah was not only following God's order, but he was also telling them the hard truth about their situation and how they needed to return to a pure faith. This dark time with droughts and famine wasn't just a coincidence in history, it was a sign of the earth's deep spiritual crisis. By openly disobeying the Lord, the king represents both the corruption of politics and the corruption of the human soul, which has become disconnected from its divine nature and purpose. People all over the world are moved by Elijah's bravery as he faced terrible hardships and cried out to heaven for help and justice. His story is a call to spiritual rebirth and self-reflection. As the prophet stood alone against power and worship, it was a powerful warning that real faith often shows up not in ease, but in conflict, and not in calm, but in storm. When God took Elijah to heaven, he didn't end his purpose. He just moved it to a different level of existence, where he continues to inspire people who want to understand how God works. His ascension is a promise that, even though we are weak and temporary, there is a place where we will live forever, and where the problems of this world will fade away in the glory of God. We are asked to carry on the lessons we learned from Elijah at this time of mental release. We are called to face our own problems with fresh faith, to stand up to unfairness with courage, and to seek the truth with an open heart because of his story. The stories in the Bible about Elijah are more than just lessons in history. They are constant calls to change ourselves and our relationships with others. As we come to the end of this series, we hope that Elijah's story has made you think about your own life and how each struggle can lead you closer to God and help you understand Him better. Each movie on this channel tells a story of faith, courage, and salvation. May they inspire you and guide you on your way. Join us as we explore new areas and keep finding the secrets and wonders that each story can hold. More truths are waiting to be revealed, and more hearts are ready to be changed by God's powerful word. Thank you for reading about Elijah's trip and the important lessons it can teach us today. Share this video with your family and friends if you liked it. These stories of hope and courage can also help them. To make sure you never miss our new looks into Bible stories, make sure you subscribe and turn on alerts. Until next time, when we'll find out more secrets. Thank you for following us to the end of this amazing story. May God be with you always. Amen.